welcome to all our viewers. My name is Mini Vivedi Gopinathan, and I'm a founder and director of PlayStreet, Bangalore, India. I'm a RDI consultant, and I integrate my work with sensory motor approach, trauma-informed practice, and polyvagal theory. Now I hand over to Abhishek, who will be taking the discussion forward. Welcome, Abhishek.
Thank you so much. My name is Abhishek, and I'm a speech language pathologist working with PlayStreet. PlayStreet is an organization that provides educational services to help children with special needs become independent and live up to their potential. We offer parent empowerment programs, integrated schooling programs, and a variety of clinical services. In recognition of Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month, our focus is firmly set on the profound significance of dyspraxia. We aim for the series to shed light on the complexities of dyspraxia, address the specific hurdles people with dyspraxia face, and raise awareness about its importance within the neurodiversity movement. Today, we are on the 14th talk of our series under the segment which focuses on invisible effects of dyspraxia. The topic for today is role of co-regulation in helping individuals with dyspraxia. And we are honored to have Ms. Linda Murphy with us to share her valuable thoughts and information on the same. Linda Murphy is a speech language pathologist and RDI consultant who cares about communication and speech language skills. She has spent over 30 years working with individuals who struggle with learning or communication. Linda loves to work closely with families and help her clients form positive connection with others. She authored the Declarative Language Handbook and Co-Regulation Handbook, co-authored Social Thinking and Me with Michelle Garcia winner, and also published several articles in Autism Spectrum Quarterly and Autism Asperger's Digest magazine. Linda hosts virtual training and continues to write in her blog, Sunday Snippets of Support. So, Ms. Linda Murphy, we are very grateful that you have taken time out of your schedule to share your knowledge. Would you like to share anything before we get started?
No, thank you so much for having me. It's great to have the opportunity to connect with people in a different country and a way different time zone, just to share things that we all care so much about. So thank you for inviting me and for having me.
Before we start, I want to tell that in the community of RDI consultants, Linda Murphy is our guru for declarative language. So everything we do in the area of declarative language, we have learned from Linda Murphy through her blogs, through her articles, through her books, through her interviews, through her videos, or whatever it is. So Linda, you just do not know how much contribution you have made into our lives of RDI consultants and all the families different RDI consultants work with across the world. We are really, really, really honored to have you here.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine.
Yeah. Yes, Abhishek.
Okay, so let's get right into questions. The first question is that let's understand what is co-regulation and why is it important?
So as a speech language pathologist, I really love the definition of co-regulation as it's talked about in the RDI community. I always say how I think a lot of people understand co-regulation in terms of the nervous system and a caregiver regulating with a child when they're upset, for example. But just again, through this communication lens as a speech language pathologist, I love this idea of co-regulation, which we take from Alan Fogel, or the researcher Alan Fogel. And in my own words, it just means that we're in sync moment to moment with another person. And we just receive communication in the moment, whatever it might be, without trying to control another person. And when we establish that co-regulation with another person in terms of communication, it just becomes really dynamic because we're just responding to each other moment to moment. And communication just really unfolds authentically and uniquely and contingently to those two people in the moment.
So when we look at co-regulation, how is co-regulation related to in a sensory-based process? You know, if you look at in our speech language development, where like development wise, if you see like the children learn to explore their all structures before they talk, and they like to explore the environment, and that's how they learn from them to talk and learn things and also language. So how does co-regulation have an impact on the sensory motor awareness of a child?
Yeah, the way I think of it is just it's this um, feedback loop. We're always getting information from the environment, from our communication partners, taking it in and responding in kind. So it's nothing that can be done in isolation, but it's really the interaction with our world that helps develop that sensory motor system further. And when a child is young, the communication partner or the caregiver rather is a big part of that as well.
So I understand there should be a good relationship between the parents or the caregivers with the child, so the child is can learn things from the environment, and so the child can learn the language and the speech skills as the child develop other skills, right? Uh,
Yeah. And
so
even I can add too, like another big part just when we pull in communication is that youngster learns about their own communication and the meaningfulness of the communication and the effectiveness of their communication, whatever form it might take, and especially when they're young, it's going to be nonverbal communication, through that caregiver's contingent response in the moment. And it all just grows from that foundation.
So now we were looking at the neurotypical children or neurotypical group of children. So now let's try to understand the same idea in children with autism. So when there's that back and forth kind of communication doesn't happen. So how would you like to connect that with co-regulation?
Yeah, well, I think what can be hard is that if people are have two different learning styles, so there might be an autistic person and a non-autistic person, and therefore we have different styles of communication. Our brains are wired differently, so initially the communication might not be as easy as it might be between neurotypical, autistic, and autistic. So I think what's really important is, say, for example, you are a neurotypical parent and you have an autistic child, you just want to tune into their communication in all its forms, even if sometimes it looks different than your communication might, and just respond to that in the moment authentically, or consider that communication valid, whatever form it might take, because that's how you get that feedback loop growing, where the child realizes my communication works, it's effective, it's valid, and we can all evolve from there together and understand each other better across social learning styles.
So we know that some children with dyspraxia, they have sensory motor difficulty. So would you like to add some point on that also?
Yeah, so let's see. So I think movement can be really important. For example, I know we're going to get more into dyspraxia and motor planning and declarative language and all that. Um, but I think so sometimes I might think about what are movement patterns that might be competent for an individual in the moment. So I know we just talked about co-regulation in terms of just being in sync moment to moment, but in RDI we expand upon it from there to create roles between two communication partners that are competent, authentic, and contingent. So as that feedback loop develops, I think what a caregiver can always remember is what might be a competent role for this child in this moment in time. And with dyspraxia, that brings in motor plans that they might be able to do successfully. So as you include them, for example, in different routines or social games, movement patterns, whatever it might be, as the caregiver, you want to think about what's a competent movement motor plan for this child in this moment, that we can build upon, and it will expand our feedback loop. So you might even think of a youngster playing peekaboo, say, with their caregiver. And um, so if we wanted to think about competent, authentic, contingent roles, there might be There might be the person who's the hider, and then there's the person who's the discoverer when they pull maybe the blanket off of the baby's eyes. And as the caregiver, you want to think, okay, what's the competent role for that child in that moment? Meaning, what's the role that they could do on their own as long as I don't prompt them and I give them the time that they need. So, and this could be different for different kids. Like, might it be most competent for the child to put the blanket over their face? Or might it be most competent for the child to pull the blanket off of their
Mm,
caregiver's face? And so as you create this contingency and this feedback loop, um, with dyspraxia, you just want to think about what are the motor plans that will be most competent to start for the individual as we engage them in this social routine, knowing it can expand from there. But your place of entry, you always want to set that child up for success. And so with dyspraxia, it's just always thinking about what's a motor plan that I know my child can do and isn't too complicated just yet, so that I can engage them with success. And then we build from there.
so it's important for us to understand where the child is and supporting from the child from that point, and from there we can push the child, right?
Or we guide the child. Yes, we guide them toward, they might take on increased responsibility, or we transfer responsibility as we notice they're ready in that moment through the cues that they might show us non-verbally. So for example, even if we just bring it back to peekaboo, we might initially start by just putting a blanket over our face because we sense the child would be able to pull it off. And then if we wait in those moments, we might spontaneously see the child put it on their own head, showing us that they're ready to assume that increased responsibility or try out that different role on their own. But we don't necessarily push them there, but rather we give them repeated opportunities to see the different roles. We wait a little bit to give them time and space to maybe
Mm,
initiate a different
mm,
role on their own.
mm,
And I think again, like all those pieces are really important with motor planning and dyspraxia, because that individual is always going to need time to think about that new motor plan. And if we
mm.
rush them too quickly, it might break our connection. It might make them feel worried. It might make them feel not successful. Um, yeah.
So you have explained it beautifully how we need to be present in that moment where the child is doing that activity. It can be play or it can be any day-to-day activities. So we have to be present in that situation so that we can guide the child according to the child's capacity.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
with the right amount of support.
Right. Yeah. And I think, yeah, it's when we're in that feedback loop and we're very in tune with the child and what they're ready for. That's even where we start to see them initiate a little bit more or seek out challenge a little bit more. And it's because we're paving the way for them. We're helping them feel safe. They know that we're going to respond to them in the moment, whatever their communication might be. So they maybe feel more comfortable trying that new or different thing that under other circumstances they may shy away from. I think when we prompt too quickly, when we don't give kids time to think, it can tend to shut them down rather than help them feel competent and
Mm.
create that space for them to initiate on their own as they feel ready.
So when we look at the cerebellum, like the neural structures. So from that perspective, so cerebellum is one structure that really help us to do motor planning and motor coordination and also rhythm. So how do you think that can really help in the co-regulation and rhythmic chant? Would you like to give some point? And also, I would like to include Minimum also into this question.
Yeah. Yeah. Minnie, I'll let you go first. You get us started on that one, and then I'll join.
Okay, so I'm just giving my take of rhythmic chant here. So in idea, what we do when we first set a pattern, very simple patterns with our children, and then we divide the roles. And as Linda explained, the roles have to be authentic and contingent. And we introduce the roles with simple rhythmic chants. what happened that if we know that the child has dyspraxia, then this I have personally experienced that rhythmic chants are very helpful to give the motor plan to the child and help the child to understand that what they are supposed to do. So, for example, I take a very simple example of ball catch and throw. So we can start with setting a pattern where it's a face-to-face. Say, for example, I and child both are standing, and a simple pattern is catch and throw, and with a simple rhythmic chant, catch, throw, catch, throw. Now, when I know that the child who's standing in front of me has difficulty with motor plans, and I want to take his skills further ahead, not just basic uh, throw and catch, but I want him to move his body more. I want him to anticipate more. So, like in sensory integration, as we say, feet forward. So, before the action happens, I would want my child to know that how the motor systems and sensory systems will be put together even before the action happens, right? So for that to happen, definitely I require balancing coordination and the movement is required to be done. And 99% or 100% of the times, everything which we do involves movement. Even blinking of my eyes is a movement. So as we say, every input is sensory and every output is motor. So I cannot isolate motor planning, balance, and coordination in anything we do. We do even if we are in a co-regulatory framework. So now, for example, the example which I was taking about the ball, and if we introduce ball catch and throw, and I want my child now to be little bit more plan his motor movements, say towards right, towards left, towards front and back. Then accordingly, I bring a rhythmic chant. So I do not bring too much of language. I do not bring too much of instructions. But what I do, I bring a rhythmic chant because rhythm organizes my brain, and too much of language, I mean, and removal of language takes away the performance demand. So then, how do I design my rhythmic chant to be catch, throw, move towards left and catch, move towards right and catch, move to left and catch, move to right and catch, back to center and catch, one step forward and catch, back and catch. And when we do it for some time, say for 2-3 minutes, those motor plans are set, right? And after that, my child can actually play the ball meaningfully when the child is ready. So what has happened that the child who initially had difficulties with motor planning, with very simple rhythmic chants, we have given a motor plan, we have set the motor plan, and then we gradually fade the rhythmic chant and then continue playing. But now instead of just monotonous catch and throw standing at one place, we are moving bodies in a much more dynamic way. So that is where I see the beauty of rhythmic chant coming into when we work with children with dyspraxia. I
Yeah.
hope
And you,
this answer convinces you, Linda. You are an expert.
mhm. Well, no,
We'd like
I
to hear
love
some
that.
thoughts on them.
Yeah, well, I think what's so neat is whatever our discipline is, we always maybe look through it, like through whatever the activity or the opportunity is through that lens. So even what I hear with that example of a rhythmic chant is you're building different motor plans with their body, but then you're using language to support comprehension of what the movements are, which just help lay the groundwork further. And even sometimes as a speech language therapist, I might also be excited because I'm thinking, oh, and you're also getting into spatial concepts like left and right or up
Right.
and down, which just support comprehension and movement in one's world also. So it's just neat how it all comes together so nicely. Yeah, in that example.
So, this is a common question for both of you. How can we bring generalization to this, like into more independent motor movement?
Mhm. Yeah, well, I know this might be a question I think that you have coming up, but sometimes we can think about same but different. So if there's any new movement, if there's any movement plan that we have established, movement plans to come are often similar, but maybe a little bit different.
Mm.
So sometimes I think when I like I could even just bring it back to creating an obstacle course, for example, for a child. And I want to always give them time to figure it out, to feel competent moving through it, and to not change it up too quickly. Because in my experience, when you change up things too quickly, then the child all of a sudden doesn't feel competent in that motor plan that has changed too much. So if we're thinking just something with an obstacle course being the basic pattern, say with balance beams or stepping over blocks or something like that, you could think about just changing one tiny thing or adding one little thing. And therefore, it's slightly different, but not so different that the child might not feel competent anymore or scared by it. And I also think an important part is not necessarily to surprise the child, but always to just be respectful and share information. So if I added a little new element, I might say something to them like, oh, I want to show you I added one more piece to our obstacle course. So it's still almost fully the same. There's just this one new element that I know you're able to manage. Um, and I think even just helping individuals see like how all of our movement plans base off of ones that are already established, that can probably help them feel less fearful as they move through a motor plan that might initially feel really unfamiliar, but it's just that a similar pattern underneath that they might not be able to recognize in that moment.
Perfect. Now I want to connect that with how can we train parents in this? So
Mhm.
we are teaching this idea. I think it's important for us to bring the same idea and to help the parents learn to incorporate at home.
Right.
How would you do that?
Yeah, I think even just helping caregivers understand the idea of motor planning is really helpful. So when a child doesn't do something, they understand it's not because they're being stubborn or because they don't want to. It's because there's maybe a new motor plan that feels a little tricky or not yet competent for them, and therefore the child's holding back. So I think even just having parents have that understanding that your child wants to do it, but there's something that might be tricky here.
Mm,
Um, and then just really talking out loud to the child about the movement plan to come, whether it's a rhythmic chant, like Minnie said, or um, or if it's a matter of describing the similar pattern that we know they already know and how this is maybe a little bit different. You know, an example could be um, the difference between, say they were bringing a cup to the table versus a plate.
mm,
It's going to be a different motor plan because the
mm,
grasp and the weight is going to be different. But maybe a caregiver could say, I remember that you've brought a cup to the plate several times, and you are able to do this. Bringing this plate to the table is really almost the same. It just feels a little bit different.
mm.
So I think narrating that similar but different pattern at play can help um, really help the children feel more secure in that movement plan in the moment. So it's almost like just helping parents understand how motor plans can vary. Like even though it might be such a small difference in our mind, it can feel like a really big difference in the child's mind. So just helping parents understand that, so then they can help narrate the similar but different when they are faced with them in the home environment, I think can be a big help.
I would also
So I
like
think
to add I would also like to add a point here that when we know that the children are having difficulties and they're dyspraxic, so sometimes when we do same and different, but sometimes we also we have to maintain consistency in the motor plans initially. So I would like to bring two real life examples which I have faced. So I was working with 20 years old child who was not able to use scissors at all. Though they have taken OT for years, but the child was not able to understand the motor plan of scissors. So then we brought rhythmic chant and same but different. What we did was like first we gave the motor plan to the finger, open close, open close, open close, and then we increase the rhythmic chant by bringing the scissor in that okay put the fingers in open close, and then we added the paper like Open, cut, and close. Open, cut, and close, and move. Open, cut, and close, and move. Open, cut, and close, move the paper. So how that with this rhythmic chant, actually, the child was able to learn cutting within 1 or 2 weeks, which she could not learn for years because motor plan was so affected. This praxic component was so high. Then second example, which I would like to bring, it is the example with my son who had a lot of difficulty while feeding because of his dyspraxic component. What was happening whenever he was eating, he was spilling a lot. A lot of food was getting spilled. And we had worked so much on this. And then I thought, okay, let me just bring the rhythmic chant and give that rhythmic chant consistently every time he eats. So that because it gets sets, the motor plan gets sets in it. So then how did I design it? Very simple rhythmic plan. First, uh, no instructions, no instructions. So it just has to be a chant. So feet on ground. The very first thing is feet on ground, stabilize the body. Then core up or sit straight, whatever my child understands. And then chair forward so that the chair and the table are very near. And then bend a bit because that is what is the requirement, right? Posture wise, bend a bit and hands on the table. This basically stabilize the whole body and now eat. So for like days together, this instruction was not, I mean, this chant was given. Feet on ground, sitting straight, chair forward, right? Bend a bit, hands on the table, stabilize and eat. And then when that motor plan was set, then I didn't have to use all these instructions at all. I just used to look at him. How do we eat? You remember how do we eat so that the food does not get spilled? You know that. You can do that. And see, that's how that whole motor coordination was established. But I actually took the help of rhythmic chant. So I think this is that's how we train the parents. That you really have to understand that what is the motor difficulty my child is facing when it's dyspraxia, and how do you simplify it for them. I hope I have extended your answer meaningfully, Linda, and I have not.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I think I also want to add the point of, other domains, like how can we incorporate in a co-regulation of this idea in other domains, something like social communication, because it's more finer skill, you know, it doesn't have to be always concrete, like, black and white. Social skills can be more finer, and we have to look at the perspective of other people, and we need to understand the situation where the things are happening. So I think when a child goes to that situation, it becomes more difficult because they have an inbuilt pattern in their mind that I have to work in this way. And when the situation goes out of their motor plan, it becomes difficult for them to engage with that person, and it becomes difficult for them to participate in that social situation. So would you like to add anything on that?
Yeah. Well, I guess there's a few different things. Like first, as as a child enters a social situation, whatever that environment might be, it can be really helpful for the adult, the therapist, the caregiver who's with them just to narrate what they see. So just to
Mm,
narrate the environment, which will help them know how to navigate it. So it could be something like, oh, I see kids over there and they're playing a game. I think if you wanted to go to them, you just need to walk around this desk and then you can sit on the floor next to them. So it's just even narrating the future motor plan for them to get to the children. I can find it can be really helpful when I am watching a game alongside a child that maybe is new for them. Similarly, I'm going to narrate what I see because social contexts or games with kids or peers, peer to peer, just are really fast and dynamic. And so for that child with dyspraxia, they're gonna a lot of the time maybe hang on the periphery or the sidelines watching because it can be really hard for them to know how to get in. So I might think about narrating for them what's happening just to help demystify it. I might think about with them and also their peers, like what might be a competent role for this child right now if they were to join the game. So if they're playing a game of catch, it could be something like, oh, I remember you know how to play catch. You've done that with your mom. Let's find a good spot for your body to be. I might even think about, is it like variables that I can play around with to create competency for that child? So it's almost like there's going to be a lot of dynamics. Is there a way that I can create some stability so the child can get in a competent way and sustain engagement before things change too quickly? So even little things might be rolling a ball back and forth on the floor is often more competent than throwing it, because as soon as kids are throwing a ball back and forth, there's a lot more movement variability and ways that the ball could go. But if you're sitting together on the floor, you're still passing the ball back and forth, but it likely won't go as far or require, as much running and catching than if you just receive it on the ground. So again, I just really try and think about what are the movement patterns that I know are going to be competent for the child that I'm working with, so that I can maybe help create this peer interaction opportunity where they will have a competent role that's contingent on their peers. And other little things to think about, like there might be games that you play with your child. So in RDI, I think we call it role reversal. So it could just be something where you play this game with your child and they're quite competent. So maintain the same game, but then you swap out your role for another child. So you have a peer-to-peer interaction opportunity where your child already knows what to do because they've practiced it with you. And the variability is a new peer, which is still going to be different because every communication partner is different, but at least we still have that underlying pattern that we know they're familiar with. And one other quick thing that I always think about too with peer interaction is just the pace. So I know I said a little bit that peer interactions just move so very fast, which can make things hard for kids with dyspraxia. So I always want to think about, like, how can I slow the pace of this activity down so my child who has dyspraxia has enough time to think through and then initiate and execute, follow through with the motor plan that they need to do. I think that's a huge one. And that's even where we can give the other kids information and just say something like, so and so really wants to play this game with you, but they need a little time to think through what they're going to do or to take their turn. So it will really help all of us if you wait, or we can slow the game down a little bit. So it's almost like you're creating understanding with the peers for the child that you work with, so that they have the time that they need to be competent in that moment.
Because I was about to ask you a question and you covered that point already. Because I want to ask about the play skills. In children with dyspraxia, play skills are affected because their ideation skills. And for example, they might know how to, stack blocks to make a tower. And any change in the activity, maybe it can be a different kind of block. So the child would think, okay, so this is a different kind of block. How can I stack it? So the child it becomes difficult for the child to do that activity. And that's when it's important for us to do the declarative language and say that, okay, this is something you have done before and we can do it again. This is something very similar to the previous block activity we have done. And I can also help you with that. So let's do that again. So this is something, it's important. And I don't know if other professionals are also would look at it in the same way. And most of the time, children with dyspraxia, they face difficulty in playing activities because of this poor motor planning and motor coordination difficulties. So would you like to say something about declarative language? You are expert in that. So can you shed some light into that?
Sure. Well, declarative language, just briefly, is that you're commenting rather than prompting or rather than asking questions. So and I know we've covered this a little bit already, but I think where it really comes in handy with dyspraxia is just narrating what we're doing so that the child understands. It's like taking the mystery out of what's going on, taking the mystery out of the environment by explaining what we see, or taking the mystery out of the play or the game that we see peers doing, um, or taking the mystery out of that new motor plan and just really explaining it. So it could be something like, oh, we're just passing the ball back and forth, or to get to your friends, you're going to go straight and then walk on the right side of the table and around. Or to sweep, all you do is you hold the handle with two hands and you move it back and forth. As a speech therapist too, if we think about speech, I've sometimes found it helpful even to just explain what my articulators are doing or how I make a certain sound. So it might be something like, to make that sound, all you have to do is put your tongue up to the roof of your mouth, or you put your lips together for that sound. So I use it in that way as well. But it's just, it's really just, I think, understanding that kids, they would imitate if they could, but something is tricky, so that they can't imitate on command. And then that language comes in and just provides a really nice scaffold to support their ability to initiate that motor plan that feels, um, just too mysterious for them, or they don't know how to get it started.
So when I was reading through your book, there were so many areas I had this aha moment, like, no, oh, why, how come I didn't think of this before? So I was really thrilled to read your declarative language handbook, and I realized that it's important for parents and also the speech therapists or the other professionals to use declarative language in their activities so that they can understand the entire picture of the scenario, what is happening uh, around the child. But most of the time, even the parents, they talk to the child in an imperative language, do this or do that. But the child does not know why they have to do that activity.
Mm-hmm.
And when they understand that why they have to do this activity, that becomes an experience for them. And next time when that happens again, the child know what they need to do.
Right.
So I think it's also very important, like we have discussed this before. So I think when we connect that with dyspraxic child, the child will also understand that, this is something that happened and I think I can do in the same way, and based on the child's experience that the child had before. So the next question is there a connection between rote learning and dyspraxia? How can declarative language help?
Yeah. So I think for this one, can you give me an example? I'm going to ask you to help me a little too. Um, yeah, like what would be an example in like of learning that you're thinking of?
Rote learning can be something like the child does in the child's day-to-day life. For example, eating the same kind of food. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Minimam can also bring one example from her
Mm-hmm.
experience.
Yes. So, for example, the child has learned the word go home. Now, whenever the context of going comes, the child is not able to use the dynamic language in the dynamic context, like go to park, go to school, go to shop, go to friend's house. But for every context where a going is involved, child only says go home. So even when the child is at house and child wants to go out, child says go home. So children with autism, like children with static learning, they just learn, like, or gestalt learners, they just learn the phrase as it is, like a full gestalt, and they're not able to break it in the context and change accordingly. So this is where, so in these scenarios, how can declarative language help?
Yeah. And I know a newer term these days, or it's not a newer term, but people are talking a lot too about Gestalt language processing, and
Yes.
that autistic individuals often learn language in chunks such as that. And then what can get, or where we want to help them develop is how to mitigate that Gestalt or expand upon it. So if a child is saying go home, but we know what they're thinking is go to school, um, then I think what we would do is we would honor that communication, like, oh, I hear that you're ready to go. And then we would expand upon it. Let's go to school. Or sometimes we can think about modeling a lot of gestalts that are declarative in nature, but that then can be mitigated or changed up easily. So if they typically say go home, we could start to model maybe the gestalt let's go home, let's go to school, let's go to the store. And then we're naturally just modeling variations on the core gestalt that they have, which will then give them greater flexibility in their language to communicate a greater range of ideas. But I think, whenever we hear that script that they might have learned or that initial gestalt, like the best thing that we can do is just respond in a very natural way by honoring the communication and then naturally expanding upon it. So again, like the child says, go home, we could say, oh, you're thinking about going. You're right, it is time to go. Let's go to school. So you're honoring their communication, meeting them in the moment, but then supporting them to expand and communicate the idea that they really do have in a more precise way, which will then help them be better understood by less familiar communication partners in the future.
That's a great strategy,
Yeah.
what you have suggested. So before Abhishek moves to the next question, I don't know, Linda, if it's okay to ask this question, but in case you think it's not required to be answered, then we can move ahead. But when it comes to dyspraxia, autism, and AEC, so would you like to shed some light? Because I think in this entire summit, we have not talked about AEC. And then I thought when we are interviewing Linda, we should just bring it up. So
Yeah.
so how can AEC bridge the gap, say for children, those who are autistic and dyspraxic and nonverbal? So or any combination, right? So would you like to comment on it, that how can
Sure.
AEC bridge the
Yeah.
gap, and how can like RDI can also be connected to that? I mean, principles of RDI or something, like we can just put this thought together.
Yeah. So, with AAC, like my primary goal is always to support that individual to communicate, in whatever form it might take. It could be nonverbal communication, it could be speaking, it could be a device. Um, and so with a device, I never want to prompt an individual to say something specific that might not be their true communication. Um, so even, for example, when somebody is starting with an AAC or they're learning their device, a lot of the times I might have my own alongside them. It's not always possible, but it's great when it is. And I always want to do what's called modeling without expectation, which means I'm really watching the nonverbal communication of that child. And I'm going to model the symbols on the device that I think they might either be um, thinking about or would want to communicate. So, for example, say they are reaching for a cup of milk. I'm not going to make them say milk on their device, but rather I'm going to model completely. Oh, you want milk? I can tell you want milk. I'm going to find milk on your device. Here it is, and I'm going to press it. So I'm very much modeling frequently how to get to different symbols on their device, showing them that their nonverbal communication is successful. And as they're ready, we also have symbols which can help expand it. And ultimately, what it's really doing is showing them, like on the inside, that they are successful communicators. They can be autonomous. Like, I always want to know what you want to communicate, not what I want to communicate, because it's about that child. And I just want to really show the way of, like, this is how you can communicate, or here's a whole other set of symbols that you can use to communicate what you might want to communicate. But with a device, kids need lots and lots of modeling and repetition, and just kind of being exposed to it before then they maybe start to do it themselves. Um, so if that answers your question.
It's I think we should move to the next question. This was beautifully answered.
Mhm.
So I think something I want to highlight here is in our center also, when our parents, when they enroll for the therapy, we always recommend them to undergo co-regulation training and also read your book. So this is like a hand guide that we always recommend our parents to read, because it is important for them to understand how important declarative language, how to use it, and it's important for them to use while they're using AAC or during the feeding activities or during other rehabilitative service like OT or PT or any activity. It's important for them to use that so the child will get more benefited. So this is something that we always do. And your book is like a Bible for us, and we recommend it to
Mhm.
our parents.
Yeah,
And
thank
it's
you.
yeah, and sometimes it's difficult for us to to convince certain parents, because even though some parents, they understand the concept, they don't like to understand, they don't take it forward to read about declarative language. So do you also face situations like that?
Yeah, I think, well, it's interesting. I think, um, what I guess what I try and do is just be a really good model myself for declarative language. So, we don't want to prompt kids to do something before they're ready to do it, before they feel competent or successful. But we know that our models for them and our partnership with them helps grow their learning and comfort. So I guess I kind of think of my relationship with caregivers in parallel, where they might not yet be ready to shift their communication style, but I'm here as they ask questions, and I'm here to model it really well and thoughtfully so they can see the beauty that it brings. And just to show I don't need to put pressure on the child, I don't need to quiz them. I can just engage them in this way and get to some really beautiful things. Um, and so I might do that, and I might model a ton and then also narrate what I'm doing so the parent or the
Mhm.
caregiver can
To
appreciate,
understand.
because they might not always notice what we notice. So it
Exactly.
could be something like, I say to the child, look, I'd love to see, um, I'd love to hear what your favorite animal is. And they answer, and then I could say something like, isn't that wonderful? I just put an idea out there, but I didn't ask them a question, and they still shared information with me. So I might do tons of modeling, but then also narrate the nuance of what I might see clinically so that the parent or the caregiver can take that away as well.
Anyone would you like to add anything on that?
Mhm.
Um, we were talking about declaratives, right?
Yeah,
Yes,
convincing
I mean,
parents to use declarative language.
Mhm.
yeah. So whenever I teach declarative language to parents, first they find it very tough themselves, and the child does not understand at all because suddenly the way parents are interacting with them changes. Of course, they do not believe in it initially. So a lot of questions which I receive is, ma'am, does it really work? I mean, my child is acting as if it's Greek and Latin for him. So I said, yes, it takes time. And I think that's where we bring the concept of scaffolding. So how you scaffold your language also gradually and spotlighting. So like IDEA is such a beautiful program, and it has taken care of everything. So with that, so in 2 3 weeks, I see that parents start appreciating declaratives. They see the change. And now the challenge remains is that it's just they have not practiced enough. So theoretically, parents start understanding declaratives, but practically it does not come naturally to them. So then I said, see, here now you have to practice more and more. So you practice yourself. When you do your framing activities, please write your declarative sentences also. So talk in declaratives with other people also, not just with your children with autism, but with your spouses, with your friends, and with your family sometimes. Trying to bring it on so that you also get used to it. Then only it will become natural with your children. But for children, I have seen moment they start understanding declaratives and that pressure of language and the pressure of performance demands and pressure of right and wrong answer is taken off. That emotional regulation enhances like anything. I mean, that connection, you can start seeing that connection. This is what is my experience.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes.
100%.
Yeah.
So before we go to the last question, uh, I would like to ask you, what would you like to add or change in parents and therapists when they engage with children with dyspraxia, and what would that be?
Yeah, I think just understanding that the scaffolding is really helpful. You know, kids are never not doing something because they don't want to. It's probably because there's something tricky for them. So I think understanding is huge. Just understanding what the obstacle might be for that child in that moment and meeting them where they're at, connecting from there and offering the support, the partnership, the competent role, whatever it might be, so the child feels comfortable engaging and sustaining engagement.
Great. Thank you so much for that input. And we are come to the end of the interview. And before that, Miriam, would you like to add anything?
Um, yes, I would like when we're talking about it. So, Linda, if we can also talk about importance of process over product and broadband communication, right? So, what do you think?
Sure.
So, how they could be helpful when it comes to children with dyspraxia?
Yeah. So this even goes back to what you had just said about performance demands and how that can be an obstacle to engagement. So the idea of process over product is just that the journey that we're engaged in together is more important than the outcome. Um, so I'm trying to think. Um, so it could say, for example, you are cleaning up a toy together. Like, of course, we want to get to the product of the toy being cleaned up. But if we take our time and create competent roles and a partnership while we clean and we just take our time, that's where the really rich communicative exchanges and opportunities and even learning can happen. But if we don't ever slow down in those moments, then I think the child with dyspraxia feels not competent and we lose out on a lot of potential learning opportunities that might happen. So, process over product is just knowing the journey with your child is more important than the product. And I know just in real life, we're always balancing, like, there are products that we need to get to, like, we do need to get to school and all this. But in those moments where you're able to slow down, it's really helpful to the child and for your relationship too. Yeah. And then I think you had talked about broadband communication too as the other piece. So I just think of that. I always like to think that communication comes in many, many forms. So I know we've talked about this, but it could be nonverbal. So it could be our facial expressions, our gestures, our body position, but it can also be our prosody or the intonation that we use. It can be our volume or our pitch. And just really appreciating that communication comes in all different forms. So it's never just about the words alone, it's about this whole communicative package. And sometimes it can be really helpful to talk less so that you and the child can be more in tune with those other aspects of communication, such as but nonverbal communication, facial expressions, gestures, intonation patterns, and that sort of thing.
Linda, before we end, I really want I want you to give a message to all our audience because this is the core of my work. I focus so much on co-regulation and I promote co-regulation. I create awareness on co-regulation, and I recommend every parent of child with autism that before you do anything, please invest your time and energy and effort in building co-regulation with your child. So this is something I want a validation from you, right?
Mm,
That as a speech and language pathologist, can you really help everyone to understand the value the co-regulation brings in development of communication and language in our children, in addition to other speech therapy approaches? I know a lot of people, they want speech therapy, they want traditional or non-traditional speech therapy, but they're not able to think beyond it. So really, as a speech language pathologist, how would you give that message, the value co-regulation brings in addition to speech therapy approaches?
Yeah.
This is something
Well,
I really want from you.
right, right. So I think what co-regulation does when you really work on that with your child, what you're really helping them feel is the back and forth reciprocity of communication. So no matter what form communication takes, at the ground level is that reciprocity, that back and forth, that flow, that give and take. So if you rush ahead to talking, you might get talking, but you might not have that back and forth flow, which makes it authentic, meaningful communication. So talking isn't as meaningful if we're not talking meaningfully to each other in a back and forth way where we're sharing ideas and information. So when you start on that ground level of that co-regulation, that reciprocity, that back and forth, you really help the child feel that. And that's what the flow of communication is all about. It's me and you together. And you really help establish that. And then as other communication skills develop, whether it's a device or spoken language, you have that at the foundation, that reciprocity and that sharing of ideas. So that always is the most important thing to come first.
So thanks a lot, Linda, for really taking the valuable time. And thanks for answering all the questions.
Yeah. Thank you so
Yes,
much for having me. And I love hearing your ideas and all that you're doing in your clinic as well, because, we're in different places with different individuals, and it's always just great and refreshing to hear how other people implement similar ideas, but in their own settings. So thank you too for sharing all of your work with me.
my pleasure.
So, thank you again for giving your valuable insight and for all the knowledge that you have shared with us today. On behalf of PlayStreet, I would like to thank you, Ms. Linda Murphy, for taking your time to share your insights and expertise with us today. Your perspective have added valuable depth to our understanding of the role of co-regulation in helping individuals with dyspraxia. To our viewers, we hope you find this interview insightful. If you have any questions or would like to share your thoughts, feel free to connect with us. At PlayStreet, we offer a special program called the Dyspraxia program, which encompasses intensive occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, a beat and co-regulation program. If you feel that your child has dyspraxia, please be free to contact us for further details regarding the program. Ms. Linda Murphy, thank you again for being a part of this conversation. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, ma'am.